Kiribati's Futile Fight for a Future by Beth and Julia. During this presentation, we will be discussing the impacts that rising sea levels have on small island states and whether their management efforts are ultimately destined to fail. We will also be focusing on the relationship between a country's wealth and their ability to protect themselves from the impacts of sea level rise. Kiribati's main problem is sea level rise. Kiribati is vulnerable to sea level rise because its land is low-lying, being up to 2 meters above sea level. Global warming has contributed to sea level rise as increased temperatures have resulted in ice sheets and glaciers melting, increasing the amount of water in the oceans. Furthermore, the increased temperatures have caused thermal expansion of water molecules, which means that the water in the sea takes up more space than before. These factors are why Kiribati is predicted to be underwater by 2100. Why might Kiribati become unlivable before it is fully submerged? Kiribati faces 2 main challenges other than sea level rise that threaten to make the island uninhabitable. The first is the destruction of coral reefs. Coral is very sensitive and vulnerable to temperature change, which means that as the water temperature increases, it may become bleached. If this happens, the coral surrounding Kiribati will start dying. This would then cause the loss of an important natural habitat, as coral reefs are used as nurseries by fish, and so would damage the fishing industry, an important part of Kiribati's community. The second challenge is the contamination of limited freshwater resources. This is largely due to inadequate waste management systems and poor sewage practices, as when Kiribati floods, the waste is able to infiltrate the freshwater supplies, allowing disease to spread and potentially causing water scarcity. Furthermore, the increased severity of flooding is likely to increase the risk of saltwater intrusion, thereby making it very likely that Kiribati will struggle with water scarcity in the future. However, this is an issue that can be managed in the future, as international aid organizations such as UNICEF can build water filters to ensure that Kiribati inhabitants have access to fresh water. Kiribati's possible solutions. Short-term solutions are essential to protect the people and the limited remaining land the island has. Over the last few years, as water levels have risen, many solutions and recommendations have been made for the island's future. Firstly, flood management strategies have been suggested, such as building sea walls and restoring key marine ecosystems. Unfortunately, building and managing sea walls is not a possible solution, as it would not be sustainable economically. This is due to the high initial costs of building a seawall, as well as the expensive management plan, as they would need to frequently increase the size and height of the seawalls as sea levels rise. Building a floating platform has also been suggested, due to some people coming to the realization that the sinking of Kiribati cannot be stopped. However, this management strategy was also deemed too expensive to carry out, as the platform would cost around $2 billion, which is 10 times Kiribati's GDP. In both of these examples, wealth seems to be a limiting factor for Kiribati's ability to find solutions, thereby suggesting that Kiribati is unable to protect themselves from the impacts of sea level rise due to their economic position. The realistic future for Kiribati's inhabitants. Firstly, emigration to nearby countries. The inhabitants of Kiribati have already begun to emigrate to nearby countries in response to what they believe to be an unavoidable situation. In response to this emigration, Kiribati's government has bought land in Fiji, providing the inhabitants of Kiribati a community to move to once rising sea levels take their homes. In terms of international aid, previously it has been in the form of monetary support for delaying the impacts of rising sea levels. However, in the future, it will most likely occur in the form of mass evacuation of the island due to it becoming fully submerged. Is the survival of sinking nations dependent on wealth? As the poorest country in Oceania, the solutions that Kiribati can realistically achieve are limited. Although hard engineering strategies, such as sea walls, may slow down the impacts of rising sea levels, they cannot prevent them indefinitely, and aren't sustainable for Kiribati's economy because of their high building and maintenance fees. This would therefore suggest that the survival of sinking nations is dependent on wealth, as Kiribati is limited to management strategies that aren't as effective due to their monetary limits. However, in the end, Kiribati's futile fight for a future comes from the fact that they cannot prevent rising sea levels from occurring, which means that in the end their future will always be emigration away from their island, irrespective of the management strategies they implement.